Okay, I think we're live. Welcome everyone to today's panel on FinTech, GovTech, LegalTech, and PropTech. Pretty wide spectrum of topics for discussion today, and we have some very interesting and accomplished panel members. Thank you very much for joining from Singapore, from London, from Tokyo, and soon Dr. Guenther will also join in from Zurich. Um, my name is Asad Sultan. I'm based in Kuala Lumpur. I'm CEO of Deutsche Malayan Ventures, which is a venture capital, venture building company here, mostly focused around fintech, digital asset exchanges, and other 4IR technology initiatives. I thought I'd start by making a quick introduction of each of our panel members, after which we can ask our panel members to talk a little bit about their current activities and their particular areas of interest as it relates to today's panel. And then we can have a discussion panel or discussion session with questions that emerge from our discussion, as well as ones relating to the particular moment that we're in right now in the recovery of COVID. To start with, we have Dr. Zeynep Engin. She's a senior research associate at UCL's Computer Science Department. Her research interests include topics at the interface of data science and public policy, particularly around digital ethics. Dr. Zeynep is primarily interested in infrastructure and methodology development to support government transformation processes under the ongoing digital revolution. She holds a PhD from Imperial College London. During her PhD studies, she was also a visiting scholar at the Tokyo Institute of Technology. She has information engineering from City University in London and BSc in mathematics from the University of Ankara in Turkey. Welcome, Dr. Zeynep. Our next panel member is Dr. Guenther Dobrauz. Dr. Guenther has not joined yet. He will be joining us shortly, but I'll make his introduction now for the benefit of the audience. Guenther is a partner at PwC Zurich and leader of PwC Legal Switzerland, where he and his team are building the law firm of the future. He is one of 7 members of PwC's global leadership team in legal and PwC's global legal tech leader. So he definitely has that space covered. Prior to this, he was a successful venture capitalist, served as in-house counsel at an international hedge fund, and practiced in court with a leading business law firm. Guenther holds a PhD in law from Johannes Kepler University, an MBA from the University of Strathclyde, and has completed executive education programs at Harvard Business School and Harvard Law School. He's the author of 10 books, mostly on investment law and regulation, and is actively involved in numerous ventures and lectures at various universities. Patrick Tan. Patrick is the CEO and General Counsel of Novum Alpha, a quantitative digital asset trading firm, as well as the deputy chairman for the Novum Group. Appointed as an advocate and solicitor in 2005, Patrick specializes in blockchain technology law with one of Singapore's top blockchain technology law firms. He oversees trading teams in the United Kingdom and Singapore, analyzing and managing risks relating to cryptocurrency. He is regularly featured in leading publications. Welcome. Jaspreet Bindra, who's the author of The Tech Whisperer and the Immune Organization, is scheduled, as you can see from your program, for this panel, but he was called away because of the COVID situation in India. And fortunately, he got a COVID test today, so he had to prioritize that, unfortunately, over the conference today. We have with us from Tokyo, Mr. Nachi Das. Nachi is a seasoned entrepreneur, investor, business leader, and former Wall Street executive. He lives in Tokyo and New York and is actively investing in and building ventures in fintech, also in security, digital wellness, biotech, real estate, hospitality, and leisure. So he has a fairly wide portfolio of investment activity around 4IR technology. His current ventures include building India's first digital neobank for the unbanked rural sector, a security and private venture, wellness ecosystems and ventures in Japan, biotech ventures, and disruptive digital health devices across Asia and the US. Nachi has spent the last 25 years in Tokyo, New York, Europe, and in global leadership roles in investment banks such as Lehman Brothers, Barclays, and fund management companies such as State Street, and FinTech startups in the US. Nachi started his career developing critical real-time technology solutions for the telecom industry in India's first digital telecom exchanges. He has an MBA from International University of Japan and the London Business School, and a BE in electronics engineering from NIT in India. So those are our panel members. Welcome all to today's session. Maybe I can start with you, Nachi, the last one first. Give us a couple of words and some thoughts as to your current activities and areas of interest, and we can rotate around the panel, hearing from each of the members. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Asad, for that kind introduction. Yes, I have a broad array of interests, as you mentioned, but my biggest passion and my singular focus right now is building a digital alternative bank for the unbanked and underbanked in India. As it sounds, it is creating a different sort of a bank with the heavy use of technology and alternative banking methods using AI and data analytics. But it's also addressing the unmet needs of 500 million unbanked and underbanked. So it's a massive exercise in financial inclusion. It is shocking that in this day and age, almost 35 to 40% of India's population is shut out from e-commerce, basic financial transactions, credit, and being able to transact your essential financial services like sending money home or buying tickets or purchasing your daily necessities. There are models like this elsewhere in the world, but what makes it particularly challenging in India is that the methods of converting cash to digital are woefully inadequate, and that's what we're trying to solve. But as we do this, as you can imagine, we're addressing the needs of a very vulnerable and digitally unsavvy population. And these are not just the people at the bottom of the pyramid, but these are also small to medium merchants who globally have difficulty accessing capital. Now, as we deploy technology to address their needs, we also encounter their vulnerabilities with their data and their identity. So the other venture that I'm very passionate about and I'm building rapidly is addressing security and privacy in all digital realms, including finance and healthcare, and increasingly in the crypto fields. So those are my two passions right now that I would like to talk in the context of this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Nachi. Yeah, very interesting. I, of course, know a little bit about your FinTech, your neobank venture in India. I think it's very exciting. It meets the at the intersection of social impact, of financial inclusion, and of delivering new technology to allow a section of the bottom of pyramid society to effectively leapfrog the existing conventional technologies and take advantage of the best best on offer that FinTech and new technologies have to offer, digital technologies have to offer. Very, very interesting. I think the marketplace for just in India for the unbanked rural community is in the hundreds of millions. So when you look at this as a global possibility, it's really a very exciting and necessary initiative. So thanks for that, Nachi. Patrick, move on to you. I know that you'll be talking about your algorithmic platforms, which are very exciting. From what I hear from everyone who's doing it, that they make an inordinate amount of money doing it. The opportunity is fantastic, and the returns are outsized. Hopefully, your platform is enjoying that as well for the time being.
Yeah, thanks, Asad. Thanks for the kind introduction. Yeah, I mean, we have been taking advantage, as you would imagine, that most algorithmic traders as well have been taking advantage of the circumstances. I'd say that the past year and definitely in the past quarter has been sort of unprecedented. We are quantitative traders. We've been trading sort of market neutral strategies for the last 4 years. In the early days during the run up in 2017. We were actually underperforming some of our long biased counterparts, but then obviously they got washed out in the crash of 2018, and we didn't. So we tend to take sort of like a very circumspect view when it comes to these nascent digital assets. As you can imagine, with any particular new asset class, there are going to be opportunities, but of course, with those opportunities, you're going to see heightened levels of risk. And I think the best analogy is for the rise of a new asset class would be something akin to gold. Whilst I don't like to make the comparison of Bitcoin to gold, I use that just as an analogy of what a new asset class and how a new asset class has the potential to evolve. One of the things that I found is, especially working with bankers who are sort of like above the ages of 45 to 50 and working with their much younger counterparts in our trading teams, is that I found that there is a disconnect in terms of trying to grasp that the technology in and of itself is the way to retain value. And one of the things that I know that Nachi is doing, which is banking the unbanked, and I think tonight one of the things that we're going to be talking about, of course, is FinTech and regulation. And one of the things that we've seen, especially in jurisdictions like India, where they're looking to sort of outright ban cryptocurrencies. And that always has me, I think that's kind of a funny thing as well, because, nobody asked for permission when they created the Bitcoin white paper. And similarly, if you look at all the decentralized finance applications, decentralized exchanges, which continue to do business, nobody stuck up their hand or applied to any regulatory authority to get those things done. And I think that's an interesting juncture between where law and technology sort of like intersect, and whether or not governments will still have the ability to, or regulators will still have the ability to effectively police a lot of these ecosystems once they get too large. And I think that's something I'd be interested to talk about tonight, and to obviously there's overlap with some of the other topics that we have.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I spent 13 years prior to my life as a venture capitalist. I spent 13 years as a capital markets trader in equities and derivatives, and for big banks. So I find this area to be of extreme interest for me. In fact, one of my jobs going back 15 years, and I have to thank, by the way, the conference organizers for using a picture of mine from like at least 10 or 15 years ago. I definitely look a lot younger than I actually am in that picture, but someone was being very kind to me there. But 15 years ago, I was CEO of a company called ITG, Investment Technology Group, in Asia, and ITG introduced not only kind of algorithmic trading platforms into the institutional asset management community, but we also had a very unique product called POSIT, which was a blind pool matching system for large volume buyers, institutional buyers and sellers in equities. And I've often thought that same logic and that same kind of toolkit could easily be applied to the crypto market as volume grows and it starts institutionalizing. And it'd be very interesting. I mean, there are huge inefficiencies in the market now, which is why there's the opportunity for these outsized returns. But it'd be very interesting to see how the introduction of these new platforms and tools will help even out and iron out some of those efficiencies and increase volume in the market. Thanks, Patrick. We'll talk a bit more about that as we go on in this session. Dr. Zeynep, I'll give the floor to you. Certainly, looking at your bio, you have a very multi-hyphenate type of area of activity and interest as an academician, as someone setting up foundations and think tanks, working with the government, working with academia. What's on your current front burner these days?
Thank you very much, Asad, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this session. I'm really pleased to be here. Okay, since you have already talked about my background, I should give the logic of that background a little bit. As you mentioned, I have got mathematics and engineering, information engineering background and bioengineering PhD. But after that, I actually took a position, an executive position in the nonprofit sector, looking into the policy issues, focusing more on the policy areas. And I plan my return back to academia, back to full-time research, to be in an area basically that makes the type of skill set that engineering and maths and stats has got, but for the policy, for the public interest, basically. And we established the Data for Policy. I have founded the Data for Policy conferences back in 2015 to capture this point. It coincided quite a lot with the big data hype at the time, and we were basically discussing quite a lot about making all available data, making use of all available data for improving public services or generally the student life in general. And the way that, following that, I joined UCL, where one of the first things that I've done was to write a paper on something that we call algorithmic government. And that is basically supposed to be looking at a whole host of different technologies, starting from artificial intelligence as a new form of knowledge generation, and with blockchain as a new form of organizing trust and institutions potentially. And together with the whole host of Internet of Things, digital twins, government data facilities and data platforms, predictive behavioral analytics. So if you think about previous technologies like location-based technologies and identity systems, etc., you end up with previously unimaginable opportunity for the government. But what you see is that the advantage of such technologies have been exploited basically in the private sector more, and the public sector is lagging behind for very obvious reasons, perhaps, but at the same time very concerning development as well. So with this algorithmic government framework that we developed, we were basically trying to think about various functionalities of government, functions of government, such as delivering public services, supporting civil servants in helping them do their job better by providing them better help, better support, and also monitor their impact and performance, perhaps, or more mundane tasks like national public records, maintaining public records and managing correspondence, national physical infrastructure, managing physical infrastructure in real time, also doing law difference that I think you are covering in this panel with the term LegalTech, and also the public policy development. So really in the public policy development stages, how we can incorporate citizen participation better in those sort of processes. So we try to basically bring together various examples, because we do see examples of each of these across the world, but we haven't yet them have in a unified, holistic sort of framework that could work as a jointly together. What we did next was basically to set up a GovTech lab based at UCL to basically provide an innovation ecosystem for research to be basically to produce proof of concepts, to engage with the private sector and the government better, and encourage student entrepreneurship in this space, basically trying to translate research outputs for government's use. One other strategic thing that I haven't so far mentioned is clearly the obvious issue of ethics. Government is obviously dealing with issues that are much higher stakes than private sector. It's not the same thing as advertising applications is not really that big a deal, perhaps. But if you are using the same type of technologies to manage your policing applications, or when you're deciding who to send to the jail, then it makes quite a lot of difference. So governments are basically, and given the importance of governments, again, for every institution and every individual, this ethical, legal applications of these technologies are also a major concern. So that was basically the next step that we launched UCL Digital Ethics Forum. Currently, I'm still on doing mix of these things. We have launched data and policy journal together with Cambridge University Press to capture scholarly knowledge in this space. And also my current activity is more now turning into algorithmic governance rather than governments directly, to mean basically strategic decision making through the basically digital revolution processes. So maybe I should stop here for now. I'm happy to I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, well, that definitely, you definitely sound like you've been very busy. You seem to be tackling not just one problem, but a multitude of problems that all fit into one sort of common puzzle to help elevate, I guess, the sort of public policy relating to digital technology and make it more efficient. I mean, there's a lot there to digest just in your introduction, and we could certainly have a long panel just around that. I think one thing that has been very apparent from this kind of extraordinary period that we've had in the last 12 months is that, as you say, the ununiformity of the approaches has created vastly different responses to the challenges of the time in different countries. And even so-called, leading developed countries like the US and UK have really had a hard time kind of like, grappling with the scale of the challenges, both to the economy, to help public health, to logistics and a myriad of other things, compared to some smaller developing economies, or economies that are much more proactively approaching the challenge by having a sort of having a preemptive and a well thought out approach. Canada, New Zealand, even Malaysia, certainly a lot of Southeast Asian countries like Korea have done extremely well in the face of the challenges. And I wonder if that hasn't to do with as much top-down planning. In fact, I'm sure it has a lot to do with top-down planning, because I think we've seen in the US in the last administration that there was kind of a vacuum of top-down planning, and that created a lot of chaos. So the top-down planning is extremely important to facilitate, kind of an efficient bottom-up sort of like optimized growth as well. And you see that these countries, as we're emerging from COVID, are enjoying far better growth rates, are enjoying, kind of much more inclusive, standards that are spread across the society in an even way, not addressed in some way to one piece and another to others. So, I think we can talk a bit more about that as well. I thought I'd lead the discussion though today, just with a kind of general statement or discussion topic, which especially if Guenther, or when Guenther joins, he might be able to contribute to. But I think, Doctor, you can also speak to it with your focus on public policy as it relates to technology and GovTech and RegTech, which is that, I was looking at some numbers today, and the latest numbers of investments coming in from the first quarter, the last 3 months of 2021. And the big winner by far has been a year over year in terms of the increase in investment dollar has been, sort of retail technology or e-commerce technology. Why? Because, we've seen a big migration from the physical world to the digital world in terms of e-commerce transaction, in terms of consumer spending and consumer shopping. Nachi's initiative in India, his neo-banking initiative, is also doing exactly that, taking a lot of analog transactions and migrating into digital platforms. So you've seen a triple-fold increase in investment in retail tech. FinTech remains the largest, the largest magnet for investment capital within the technology spectrum. And FinTech and retail tech today together accounted for over $30 billion of investment dollar just in the last 3 months. Versus most of the other sectors, you've seen a pretty sharp drop-off in new investment spending. And that's quite interesting. Like if you look at LegalTech, for example, it doesn't even register. I mean, it's not even $1 billion of spending by comparison in the last 3 months. PropTech, which is another subject for today's panel discussion, somewhere between $1 to $2 billion of spending, so about double legal tech. So, but compared to FinTech and compared to some of the other spaces, one gets the sense that, there's kind of a oxygen being sucked up from the room from the other verticals and just being aggregated around these major, kind of initiatives around FinTech and retail tech. And maybe that's to the detriment of the development of technology in those sectors. Is that something that you find challenging in your work, Doctor? Like you're working, let's say, in the RegTech space, and that by, I think, looking at my numbers, RegTech is somewhere between $4 to $5 billion of investment versus $16 billion for FinTech. So 1/4 of that. How does that affect your the development of your technology versus technology in the private sector?
Is this a question for me?
Yes, please. Yeah, since you're working more in the RegTech and the GovTech space, are you finding it challenging to compete for the investment dollar to grow the platforms in your areas versus the other more commercial private sector initiatives around FinTech, for example?
Absolutely. I mean, well, one key thing is basically the research in this sort of topics in both AI and blockchain that I think are probably the two most prominent ideas that people are trying to take forward. We are seeing the shift into private sector basically in terms of research as well. The research capacity of major corporations like Google's, Facebook's, Amazon's, their research capacity is much bigger than universities, top universities around the world. And clearly, I mean, FinTech is where the money is, and probably that's also sort of another place where that has quite a lot of sort of prior advanced thinking as well. Whereas GovTech is, I think by design, is a bit more problematic, basically. Although people do like the idea of improving government through technologies, there are a lot of issues to deal with. One is obviously the high stakes situation of government sector in general. It's not, you don't see government taking up a technology easily because of all the associated issues, ethical concerns, legal concerns. It doesn't have that sort of luxury at a principal level, that is. And there are also lots of other problems, like governance sector is more bureaucratic, more you have to translate the ideas into policy, policymakers and civil servants, and that's already another huge challenge to really explain what you can do and what is possible, and also why they should undertake those sort of innovations. There was also, of course, I mean, if you are going to innovate in governance, then it's major. I mean, it requires much bigger country scale, maybe investments as well, and that is another thing. So there are a whole host of reasons why governments are not really that has got that much appetite to going first, basically, in these sort of issues. They do think they're now realizing after the success of the private sector and FinTech and other areas. I think governments are now realizing that they have to catch up the opportunities, seize the opportunities rather than pioneer. Whereas I think their role should really be pioneering, because otherwise they lag behind, and then we come through crisis situations like what happened in 2008 during the global financial crisis, where government did not understand much about what was going wrong in the sector, and then everything, basically lots of things collapsed. Well, yes, governments should be pioneer, should be championing, but lots of other practical reasons and principal reasons why they cannot be that much that much getting the point at this stage, and therefore the investments are affected. Basically, it's difficult to convince government. If I answered properly.
Right. Well, I think we've seen, especially in the stimulus programs that many governments have rolled out after or during the COVID pandemic crisis, a lot of that allocation of spending is going towards promoting digital initiatives, and especially trying to protect the kind of, you would call the bottom of pyramid societies, members of society, like the SMEs, individuals, rural populations, and giving them some buffer, so that they don't get too far left behind as the recovery takes hold. But thanks for those comments. Guenther, welcome. I believe you're dialing in from Zurich. We took the liberty at the outset of the panel to introduce you or give a short bio of your introduction, and we look forward to hearing about you seem to be the one-man destination for all things legal tech. So we'll definitely come back to you in a second on that topic, as it's certainly part of this panel. But Patrick, you heard what the doctor said. FinTech is where the money is, and you're running an asset management platform based on FinTech. So is that the case? Is this where the action is right now? And how is that dynamic going to change as the market becomes more efficient?
I think we can't deny the role that excess liquidity in the markets has had on some asset pricing. Whether or not you think that means that we are really in a bubble or not, I mean, I leave that to your own personal judgments. But it's hard to ignore the fact that there has been an unprecedented level of monetary and fiscal stimulus in response to the pandemic. Now, that having been said, I think those moves and those measures were necessary. I think we've seen from the aftermath of 2008's financial crisis that when those programs were unwound too quickly, you could set in place secondary shocks, so to speak. So that there were such large movements to release liquidity, to help businesses, to help households, to tide over the difficult times in the face of an unprecedented situation is good. I guess one of the things about why do we not see a lot of spending in, say, RegTech or legal tech and stuff like that is not just because that's not where the money is, but also because if you look at the response of the US and why the initial response to the coronavirus crisis was perhaps not as favorable as it could have been, is because we've seen a decline in faith and trust in governments. And the Trump administration, pointing to the Trump administration is just, you're just pointing to the crystallization of a decades-long problem. This is not new. If you ask your average American, they look at Washington as sort of like the definition of government ineptitude and sort of corporate capture. So this is not new. None of this is new. Everything that we're seeing now is sort of has been decades in the making. But what do we see? Why did Bitcoin come up in 2008, for instance? It was a response. It was a decentralized response to what was a centrally created issue. The concentration and focus of too much power, too much influence, too much economy into the hands of the few. So this was a response. But ironically, if you look at cryptocurrencies and digital assets for that matter, again, we're seeing the exact same thing happen. And we're seeing that the bulk of wealth or the bulk of value creation and the bulk of the gains from this in the sense sector is actually concentrated in the hands of very few. Now, we see banks coming in, we see institutional investors coming in. We are in the midst of setting up a few regulated funds, a few ETP products. These are not things that are going to be accessible to your unbanked villager in somewhere in Rawalpindi or something, you know. I mean, I don't deny we are not part of the solution. I'll give that to you. We are part of the problem because we continue to entrench this system of the haves and the have-nots. Where I think you have this dichotomy of crypto, like digital assets, and the debasement of fiat currencies, which is what a lot of people like to talk about, is that now it's not in the nature of governments to sort of not enjoy spending at some stage, and we've seen that with the Biden administration. We've seen that, hey, you know what, we managed to pass a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. Let's go for 2.2. And then 1x, 3, 4, 5. And we will find 1,001 excuses as to why we can keep releasing further fiscal stimulus. Fortunately, depending on what measure of inflation that you use, you don't see a high level of consumer price inflation. You don't see bread lines and stuff like that, which is what people typically associate with inflation. But we do see is asset inflation, even in my own industry with digital assets and stuff like that, which gives you that sort of supernormal profits which we're experiencing at this point in time. Is that sustainable? I honestly couldn't tell you. Ever since we moved away from the gold standard, all bets are off. We don't know that for sure. So where does LegalTech and GovTech comes in is that I'll give you an example of Singapore. Singapore is actually highly digitalized, highly automated when it comes to processing cases through the court system. Even before the pandemic, a lot of hearings and a lot of applications were heard via video conferencing. All of our documents are all filed e-affidavits, e-statements of claims. Everything is done electronically. Singaporeans generally have a very high level of trust in their government. So that has never been an issue to put things on the digital side. So when it comes to countries where the level of trust in the government is already very low, digitalizing it actually doesn't do it any favors. It just, and especially where the population is not digitally literate, the level of digital literacy is very low, that actually gives them another level of abstraction to say that, hey, you know what, the government is behind the scenes. They're cooking the books, and that's I think perhaps that's where the blockchain technology bit comes in, where because it's decentralized, it's open for inspection, provided you understand how to do it, you can inspect all of these records. It's a way for the goalposts not to shift, and I think that's really one way to look at it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the many things you said have are exactly on the same wavelength as I think some of the important topics that we encounter and that we're also trying to solve with the use of technology. As you suggested, the use of blockchain, the use of kind of objective machine learning type technologies is supposed to push down, power and data information into the hands of people, and ultimately into the hands of people who create them, because in the future, information and data is actually, the most monetizable real asset that we will have, and that future is being catalyzed very quickly by the rapid digitalization of many industries, many sectors that we're seeing today, and by the parabolic increase in interest in not just cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ethereum and so forth, but also just generally in the idea of tokenizing assets. NFTs, as you know, is one of the hottest sort of like topics of discussion today, and it sort of takes it almost to the next level. It's the 5G version of it, if you will, where we start looking at all property assets, all type of memorabilia and arts and antiques, films, music, all living in a digital environment, kind of the metaverse, if you will. Anyway, that's not the topic for today's discussion, and that is certainly a very interesting topic, which we could spend the rest of the, just short time we have, another 20, 25 minutes. But I think what you did say segues nicely into LegalTech as a platform. Yes, we would be very poorly served if we allowed, like we have done in the previous crises, to increase the divide between the polarization, if you will, between the haves and the have-nots. But in order for that to be democratized, you need to have common platforms. You need to be able to get that rolled out in a fairly ubiquitous and uniform way. So what are some of the trends, Guenther, if you could share with us? How is that happening in the legal tech environment? Just very quickly, before you start and answer that question, I was pointing out to the panel at the outset that legal tech as a vertical gets little amount of new dollars spent relative to the big bucket verticals of like retail tech and fintech. And I mean, do you in the ecosystem that you're working with, do you see that you have enough oxygen, enough fuel, and enough tools to kind of make this change happen and roll it out in a fairly uniform and ubiquitous way?
That's a funny one. The answer is simple: no.
Okay.
The reason,
next.
No, the reason is that in particular, if you compare legal tech to the others you've been quoting, it's obviously going into an almost fossil industry, right? Because legal is all about doing things yourself with a small group of people and charging a lot of money for that. So in general, and you also have to see that people who become lawyers, and I'm saying that because I'm one of them, right? They don't do that because they like technology, right? So you usually do it for the three-piece suit and for sitting in the corner window office and looking out there. So obviously there's a lot of forces working against it. But all of that being said, I think it's starting now. And the interesting thing is, other than FinTech, for example, which has always been presented as this new force going up against the established financial industry, and hence also been competed by that and not really helped at the beginning. Legal tech, in my experience from day one, has been kind of welcomed by the industry. Now it's fighting mostly with problems like, I don't want to get into the really depth of this, but just to give you one example, the partner structure, right? Most law firms that I know are owned by the oldest partners. So if they're 5 years away from retirement, they're not super interested in giving all of the money into the new technology. So what's really driving that, and I think COVID was a real player in that, and is a key player in that, is that CFOs, in particular in the financial services industry, are really driving now to bring down costs. And in particular, the legal part of organizations has come heavily under criticism. And so it's basically by them demanding that you deliver whatever you deliver in a kind of digitally apt way that it's starting to happen. So yes, in overall, I think the numbers are still quite small compared to the other monsters out there, but it's starting to happen. And once it does, I believe it will be really big. Right? If you just look at the legal market in the US and so forth, which is huge, huge, huge. Right? So there's a lot of money to be made.
Yeah. And Dr. Zeynep was also saying that if countries can incorporate these, you can call it protocols or these common formats and do it in a uniform way, then that also gives this idea of like democratization of data and democratization of information a lot more leg to stand on. And legal tech, I think, can be also much more pervasively rolled out if it's done with that type of reg tech coordination. Right.
Fully agree. Fully agree. There was a super interesting question. I don't know if you've seen that. It's moved away now, but at the bottom it was. Is there a way to move back to it?
You can look at the comments to the right of your screen.
Yeah.
Here we go. Comments.
Okay. All right.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, I'll come to that in a second. Let me just, since we have had a fairly full panel, and in fact, Jaspreet, who was also going to join, I think would have added some very interesting comments and perspective to it as well. But one of the themes that I think has just emerged from our discussion today is the opportunity that we have to combine the disruptive nature of technology in these conventional verticals, whether it's PropTech or legal tech, whether it's government or public policy, whether, of course, FinTech, as you say, that's the big 800-pound gorilla. But ultimately, the theme of it is like Patrick said. Maybe we're not part of the solution. Maybe we're part of the problem. But maybe you're part of the solution to the problem. In the problem itself, because you're changing some of the nature of the way capital works in capital markets, and providing alternatives, as you call it, the debasement perhaps of existing asset classes and the renewal of new ones. So ultimately, it's really about the social impact and the ability for these technologies and these initiatives to drive change within elements of society, make them more democratic in a way, certainly make them more uniform and make them more equitable. So with that, Nachi, maybe I'll put it back to you. I want to give you a chance to also contribute to the discussion, because I think it's very appropriate that, as you said in your introduction, your front of mind focus right now is deploying these solutions out into the unbanked, into the kind of the section of society, and in countries like India, that section of society is very, very large, that doesn't have the benefit of the disruptive change happening in areas like FinTech, and in areas like retail tech, and in areas like AI, blockchain, etc. So how's that going for you in India? I mean, that must be a huge challenge.
Yeah, thank you very much, Asad. I'll start off with some very stark reminders. And it's not just India. About 80% of people in Asia broadly do not have access to credit. Just think about that for a minute. 80% do not have access to credit. And if you take a look at small and medium-sized companies globally, I had some companies that I'd invested in when I was in Wall Street in the US. Even those companies have had difficulty in accessing credit. Now, having said that, I would like to posit that FinTech is actually too broad a term. And if we think about FinTech in its proper form, it's actually digitizing transactions to the extent possible and making them accessible to everybody. In which case, it will naturally fold into itself aspects of legal tech, government tech, and retail tech that we have talked about. The problem why it has not happened so far is that the bulk of FinTech investments have gone into what I call solving the first world problems of credit card friction. You'd spend a minute using a credit card in the old way. Now you can do it with an NFC or just tapping your phone on a device and going on. They still haven't solved the problem of credit in the first world. Now in India, what we see is we saw an extreme version of that, where nearly 40% of the population deals primarily in cash, but does not have access to Amazon, Flipkart, getting basic loans, getting paid in digital form. So they were living a completely parallel life. Now, as we try to digitize those transactions, we find that we are blocked by banks. Not deliberately, but that's how banks operate. They have inertia, they have outdated technologies, so we go about creating our own. But when you do that, you realize that you're actually making transactions go faster. And the government of India saw that and said, hey, wait a second, I've got 60 million people that are specially abled, are handicapped, and I'm giving them grants and benefits so that they can have a better life or access to capital, but they're putting that in bank accounts. So these people are handicapped. They can't go to the bank accounts and withdraw cash. But when they saw our solution, they said, hey, look, we can put our cash directly on your cards. At one stroke, we have digitized grants from the government to the vulnerable population. You have made access very, very practically feasible. And what that does is it also speeds up transactions. And this has got a real economic impact because it increases the velocity of money. If you stick primarily in cash and if you operate in the non-formal world, that $100 note would take maybe 3 days to make a complete cycle. When you digitize it, it probably takes a few hours. That frees up the producers of goods, the users of goods, to complete more transactions. And this is perhaps the most significant impact that would come from digitizing transactions globally. And it's not limited to the bottom of the pyramid. Now, when you look at blockchain, and we have all worked in Wall Street, or most of us, and we can attest to how transactions are married very deeply to contracts, whether ISDA contracts or loan contracts or even agreements. Now, smart contracts are coming into vogue. They can remove a lot of friction. They can remove the need for a lot of third-party resources like lawyers for real estate agreements. But it hasn't reached there yet. And I think a significant obstacle for that is that because we haven't digitized transactions enough and we haven't provided access enough. Once that happens, I think we'll reach an inflection point, and then funds would be readily available for retail tech and legal tech and insurtech, actually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's sort of a domino system. Once one goes, everything else will follow. Let me now quickly get to some of the comments. I saw 2 or 3 comments come through as we were discussing it. I wanted to give, and we have an audience, I think, of over 1,000 viewers currently live. But once we'll post the, we'll post the YouTube link to the session, I'm sure that this discussion can be enjoyed by several thousand viewers. So let me give them a chance to, pose some questions here. I'll just throw a few out. Give me one moment and I'll just open the chat box. Okay. Well, one question has come through asking about the differences, and any member of the panel, please feel free to jump in and comment on these. One viewer is asking, well, what are the main differences in the emergence of FinTech across various countries? The emergence of FinTech across various countries.
Maybe I would say it's not so much countries, obviously, well, I think it's the earlier ones and the little later ones. And as I kindly hinted to, originally they were kind of attackers on the established industry, and partly they still are. But as of recently, I think that will become kind of combined. So we're seeing a lot of banks now buying FinTech, merging with FinTechs. It's kind of going across a bit. Obviously, I don't have a real composite view in the last year. Travel bans and so forth, thanks to COVID, hasn't helped with that. So I'm not sure if it's true, but that is kind of my perception.
Well, here's one for you, Guenther. The other comment from the same person, or maybe a different person, came in. When will legal tech replace lawyers? When will that happy day come?
Well, I hope tomorrow. But no, I think in particular in legal, we have to be very careful because we all think about disruptive innovations and S-curves and all those bell curves of adoption and this good stuff. With legal, and obviously with others as well, but in the legal sphere, a lot of that is being done by lawyers is protected by regulation, right? You can have the best computer to represent you in court, but if that computer is not admitted to the bar, it's not going to happen, right? So I think but what we are already seeing is that a lot of the commodity part of legal is being outsourced almost to non-legal firms, right? And this is where technology comes in if the legal firms don't have it themselves. So especially when you look into DD, company foundations, those kind of things. So I think the question that really comes is, what is the legal job? And I'm always kind of reminded of what my grandfather told me. And he said, look, legal is about that person that comes to you and puts their hand on your shoulder and said, it's going to be fine. I'm going to get you out of the traffic jam discussion. I'm going to get you out of that murder discussion, whatever it may be. But it's stuff that gets really to your heart. And I think this is where the lawyers will be, because that is something you can't automate, and there is no added value that comes out of technology. Everything else that doesn't tick that box, I think, is heavily under risk right now of being taken away. And we're already seeing that, right? Because we've started to invest rather early, and then we've been investing a little bit in, or more than just a little bit, in this sphere. I don't know where it is, but I'm seeing it happening.
If I just jump in here, I think I want to agree with Guenther on that. Oftentimes, I think proponents who say that, technology is going to replace certain types of professions. I think that when it comes to things like smart contracts are always given as an example as to why lawyers would become irrelevant in the near future. And I think that actually overestimates the technology at its current state of the art. We have to remember that any software program is only as good as the data that you put in. And as I'm sure Dr. Zeynep will agree with that. So even with the smart contract, the parameters with which this contract can function are very, very limited. And on top of that, it assumes that the data that you're getting for the execution of that contract are clean. On our part, we write thousands of smart contracts all the time. And one of the biggest challenges for us in our space is actually to find oracles, which is like an arbiter of truth, a source of truth that is indisputable. And even that presents itself as a challenge. And anytime there's a degree of subtleties or subjectivity that comes into any kind of contract that you're negotiating, or any sort of agreement that cannot be completely standardized. So things like trade credit, letters of credit, stuff like that, very standard forms, OTC type contracts, swaps, those are easy to do. Those are easy to do because they're very standard. Nobody has any disputes as to the quality and to the execution. And we only take the data from one source, which is the NYSE or something like that, or the London Gold Exchange. That's easy. That's easy to do. But when I think and if you ask any practitioner who operates in the cryptocurrency space or digital asset space, they'll tell you straight away that if you ask me now how much is Bitcoin, I'll tell you I really don't know. It depends on who you're asking, for instance, because everybody will come up with a different number depending on which exchange you're doing that. You could do a weighted average, but that's not necessarily reflective of any real one price from any one single source of truth. And I think that when it comes to things like LegalTech, people have to remember that there are limitations to the technology, especially when you don't have a single source of truth. And that's one of the things that I alluded to earlier, which is that why do we see such a big problem in the US when it came to the coronavirus crisis? Why do we see even to this day that so many Americans are refusing to get themselves vaccinated? Because there isn't one commonly agreed source of truth which people can operate from. And as long as we don't have that, if we can't even argue on the same set of facts, it's not very easy. It's not possible for us to move forward.
Okay, no. So we have about 4 or 5 minutes left, and I really enjoyed hearing about some of the broader themed touch points on each of your comments. So I want to go back to I think, Patrick, you were talking about how the asset inflation is occurring due to too much liquidity, and you don't know if that problem will go away or self-correct itself. It hasn't done that, actually. If you look over the last decades, in fact, you're seeing this increasing kind of divergence between the haves and the have-nots, which is turning into a lot of societal kind of problems that are reflected in politics, reflected in the way that we interact with our within the communities in society, immigrants, things like that. Big topics are all affected by this common problem. Technology has the promise, certainly for IR technology, which is in some way objective, has the promise of reversing that trend and converging, kind of empowerment in the society again. As Dr. Zeynep said, in some ways, GovTech is challenged because it's lagging the private sector. But in other ways, the private sector may find the solutions of its own because they're incorporating decentralized technologies like blockchain. What do you guys think? I mean, do you think that this is an inflection point and things are going to change, or is it going to be more of the same? And unfortunately, we're on a set trajectory.
Well, on my LinkedIn page, I say the future is decentralized, and that's like this boom statement. But if you think that's true, right? I mean, a lot of the problems we're having right now, they go back to the Industrial Revolution when we were building those great companies that are out there. But I don't think there will be the future. So I personally believe that there will be this change, yes.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Zeynep, what do you think?
Okay, I think we are in a very different place than obviously 1.5 years ago, just before COVID-19 outbreak sort of affected everyone. Basically, currently we are all dependent on education becoming online, health services, some of the health services becoming online. We will be increasingly relying on all sorts of public services basically becoming online, and governance becoming online as well. So I think, and also you do see, well, I complained about GovTech being sort of less funded in comparison to the others, but at the same time, the government investments, you can see how China is investing on AI, for example, how US is taking things quite fast forward, and UK, EU probably looking into more from a human values, individual rights perspective. There are some major schools of these technologies emerging as well, and I think the adoption, especially in a post-COVID world, is going to be much faster than it has been.
Nachi, you want to get the last word in? We have just 30 seconds or so, and then we have to hand over to the next panel.
Yeah. So no, I agree with Guenther. It is going to be decentralized. The pace is going to increase, and what I also think is that because of COVID, there's greater agency of the individual. We're all being empowered to find things for ourselves and use technology to get ahead. I'm not that confident about the slowdown of asset inflation. I think that's probably going to increase further until such time that we have total distribution of digital assets and monetary assets on a much broader scale.
Well, if you're an owner of assets, we're living in a good time. But if you're not an owner of assets, maybe the promise of these technologies can pave the way to a better future. With that, thank you very much, all panelists, for joining us, Dr. Zeynep, Patrick, Guenther, and Nachi. Appreciate your thoughts, your time, and look forward to having this again. Thank you again to the organizers as well for hosting us for this forum.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.